If you have your own business, I can guarantee you've had this thought before. If I could just stop all of these distractions, I'd finally be able to focus. If the emails would stop, if the messages would slow down, if my team didn't need me every 5 minutes, if clients didn't keep asking questions, if new problems didn't keep appearing during the day, then you think you could finally sit down and get real work done. But here's the truth. Even if all of those distractions disappeared tomorrow, most people would still struggle to focus because distractions usually aren't the real problem. Focus needs to come first. So, in today's episode, I want to show you exactly how to strengthen your focus. And I'm going to walk you through the 5 questions I use at the beginning of every single coaching session. Questions that you can use anytime throughout the day when you need a focus reset. These questions instantly cut through overwhelm, bring you back to what's important, and make focusing so much easier. And stay with me because the 3rd question is the one that almost every business owner gets wrong, and it's the one that usually unlocks the biggest breakthrough. Welcome to Weekly Momentum. I'm the Get It Done Diva, and each week on this podcast, we focus on one thing: helping women in business build habits and systems that they need so that they can escape the day-to-day grind and instead invest more time working on their business, not just in it. Now, for more than 20 years, I've helped CEOs and founders step out of that day-to-day grind and install practical weekly operating systems and 90-day planning rhythms. Because of whether your goal is to build a focused 40-hour work week or reduce your work week to 4 hours, the only way to get there is to create systems that allow you to own your time and to use it intentionally. And when you do that, you create the space to shift what you know as the expert into what you're known for. You get to lead and impact more people in the process. When your priorities, your calendar, and your actions are aligned, momentum stops being something you just hope for and becomes something that you build. Because greatness is a habit, not a hustle. And momentum isn't created by pushing harder. It's created by installing habits that quietly move the right work forward every single week. Now, today, we're going to talk about one of the most important habits behind momentum: focus. Most business owners believe their biggest problem is distractions. But what I've seen over and over again in coaching sessions is that the real challenge is not distractions, it's focus. And when focus gets stronger, something interesting happens. Distractions stop running your day. Decisions become much clearer and progress starts happening much faster. So in today's episode, I'm going to walk you through the 5 questions I ask at the beginning of every coaching session, questions that instantly bring my clients back to what matters most and make focusing on the right work so much easier. And when you use these questions consistently, something powerful happens. All of the noise quiets down. Your priorities become clearer, and your next step becomes so much more obvious. And when we're truly focused, 2 things happen. First, it becomes much harder for distractions to pull us away. And second, we become much better at handling interruptions very quickly and then returning to the work that we're doing. You also start to train the people around you, your team, your clients, even your family, when you're available and when you're not. And when you also have systems in place and there's pre-decided ways of doing things, people don't need to interrupt us all the time and ask, what shall I do next? Your business can move forward without needing your attention every 5 minutes. So the real skill successful leaders develop isn't eliminating distractions completely. That's impossible. The real skill is strengthening focus. And if you feel like, yes, I need that, you're not alone. If you've ever ended the day wondering where the time went, if you started 5 projects but finished none, or if your week is full but your biggest goal hasn't moved, this episode is going to help. Now, in almost every coaching session that I run, a client jumps on the Zoom with me, and I always start with one simple question. What's the main annual or 90-day goal you're working towards right now? And almost immediately, they start answering with something completely different than the last time we spoke. Suddenly, the focus is marketing or hiring or fixing a payment issue or chasing a new idea. And I stop them and I say, wait a second. Last session, we said your main goal this quarter was fill in the blank. Has that changed? And almost every time they pause and say, no, that's still the goal. They didn't change direction. They just got pulled into everything that happened during the week. They forgot. They lost the plot. And when I first started coaching over 20 years ago, I was told to work with a coach because it would help me become a better coach. So being the good student, I did. And I worked with several coaches. I had great sessions with my coaches, big aha moments and insights. But then afterwards, I'd run out of steam pretty quickly between the sessions. And just like with my clients, I would start every session with my coach on a different topic. Now, because I was being coached to also figure out how to be a better coach, I quickly realized that something was missing here. Every coach I worked with would have me fill out a questionnaire when we first started working together. They'd ask me about my big goals, projects, my strengths, challenges, and what I wanted to work on. And they told me repeatedly that they were holding the space for me. Yet, as we set the agenda at the beginning of every single session that we were starting, we were always somewhere different. And I honestly felt like I wasn't really making any progress. And that's exactly why when I started coaching my own clients, I was adamant about using the framework of a 90-day plan. It's a bigger goal to keep in mind and to reference every single session. And even if my client loses the plot and doesn't remember what their 90-day goal is, at the beginning of every session, I ask them what it is, and I have the physical plan to look at so we can both make sure that we're working on the most important things. Now, if they need to make a change to the plan and they want to redirect it, I'm all for that. I don't want anybody to stick to a plan that isn't the right plan anymore. But most of the time, it isn't that they want to change the plan, it's just that they forgot. So at the beginning of every session, I ask my clients what their 90-day goal is. I have the physical plan to look at so we can make sure we're working on the most important things instead of being distracted by the latest thing that interrupted them right before our call or a new idea that someone just suggested for them for their marketing that they should do, or avoidance. Yep, I know often the things that my clients need to do, maybe just like you, they're avoiding. And a big part of my job as the coach is reminding them what their goal is, so then they can decide if they want to continue to move towards it or shift the goal. They can address challenges that are causing them to avoid taking action. And together we can sift through and maybe back burner some of those new ideas so we can stay on track. And that's exactly why every coaching session I run starts with the same 5 questions. Because focus doesn't happen automatically. It has to be reset. And if you're feeling busy but you're not making the progress you want in your business, chances are you don't have a distraction problem. You have a focus problem. These 5 questions have helped my clients simplify complicated decisions, stop chasing 10 different priorities at once, and focus on the one thing that will actually move them towards their goal. A study from the University of California, Irvine found that when we do get interrupted, which is all the time as business owners, it takes an average of 20 minutes to fully regain focus. 20 minutes. That means if you get pulled away from your work 4 or 5 times an hour, which is very common in business, you're constantly restarting and refocusing. Another study from Stanford University showed that people who try to multitask actually perform worse on cognitive tasks than those who focus on one thing at a time. So in other words, multitasking, it doesn't make us more productive. It makes us slower. And there's a quote from author Cal Newport that I love. Clarity about what matters provides clarity about what does not. Or as I like to say, when you say yes to one thing, even unconsciously, you automatically say no to one or more things, even if you don't realize it till later. Now, when your destination is clear, you know your big goal, your 90-day goal, decisions are easier. But when the goal is fuzzy, everything's going to start competing for your attention. No wonder it's so easy to be distracted. And that's why the first thing I always do in coaching sessions is bring the conversation back to the goal, the big goal. We keep the main thing the main thing. So let's go over the 5 questions that bring focus back. These 5 questions create what I like to call a focus reset. They reconnect the conversation to the bigger objective, identify what's getting in the way, and define your next move. You can use them anytime to refocus. If you're driving or walking right now, you can just listen. But if you're sitting somewhere with a notebook, you might want to write these down because these 5 questions can reset your focus in less than 5 minutes. Question 1, the goal. The first question I ask is this. I mentioned it already. What is the main goal, 90-day or annual goal, that you want to move forward towards right now? Now, many clients try to answer this question differently, as I mentioned every session. They'll say something like, oh, I think I really need to focus on marketing right now, or I need to fix my systems, or I probably should hire someone. And I just pause them and I remind them that this question that I'm asking, question number 1 here, is not supposed to change every week. The purpose of this question is to reconnect to the bigger goal that you've already selected when you did your 90-day or your annual planning. So I'll start to refocus them and say something like, remember, your goal this quarter is blank. Has that changed? And almost every time they say, no, that's still the goal, they just got pulled into the noise of the week and they forgot. Running a business means problems appear constantly. Clients need new things. Payments need fixing. Team members have questions. Software breaks. Ideas pop up. But if the main goal changes every time something new shows up, nothing's ever going to get done. We move 5 feet in one direction, 5 feet in another, and we're just spinning in circles. If we want to make progress, we need to keep on holding steady on one destination and remind ourselves what that is all the time. Real focus means returning to the same goal often enough to finish it, to achieve it. Your best defense for that is a 90-day plan and, in all honesty, a coach or an accountability partner to ask you again and again, like a pop quiz, what's your 90-day goal? So that you filter all the hundreds of decisions you have to make every single day through the filter of that goal. With a clear goal in mind, it will be so much easier for you to say no to more of those distractions. And when you're focused on one main goal, you can recognize the progress you're making. Because instead of starting 50 things and not finishing them and feeling overwhelmed, you can celebrate the milestones you hit as you make progress. Question 2, the obstacle. Once you've reminded yourself of your goal, the next question that I ask my clients is, what challenges or obstacles are getting in the way of that goal? This is where the real coaching begins, because once the goal is clear, then we can identify the specific things that are slowing progress down. And we can address those instead of all of the unrelated other obstacles and challenges that don't need to be solved right now. Often the obstacles that we face are just masquerading as distractions. We don't need to solve them to move forward. We just want to solve them because we are built as human beings to solve problems. Like I mentioned in an earlier episode, we have to be really clear on which problems we're going to solve, not try to solve every problem if we want to make progress. In a recent coaching session, a client of mine realized they were still tracking all of their client activity in a spreadsheet and it wasn't working anymore. Every update was manual, information was scattered, it was difficult to see the full picture of their clients. Once we identified that obstacle cleanly, then the solution became more obvious. Instead of trying to improve the spreadsheet again, the next step was simple. My client needed to research 1 to 3 CRM options and bring them to the next session. When the obstacle becomes clear, the next step becomes clearer too. So asking yourself, what are the obstacles or challenges in the way of my goal, is the question that will help you focus on solving better problems, not all the problems. Now, if you're finding this helpful so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future weekly momentum episodes. Because every week we break down practical strategies to help you get the right work done without burning out. Now let's move into question number 3, looking at what needs to work better. What would you most like working better in your business or schedule right now? Now, this question isn't asked so we immediately jump into solving that problem. It's really about awareness. Because when people pause and answer this honestly, something interesting usually happens. They start noticing patterns, especially from the time in between our sessions. They might realize they've stopped planning their day the way they used to, or that they haven't created real time to work on their business. Or they might see that they've been reacting to requests all week instead of focusing on projects that move the business forward. The purpose of this question isn't to fix everything in that moment. It's to help my client to step back and say, this area needs attention. Because once you see that clearly, it becomes much easier to decide what actually deserves your focus next. And often just recognizing what needs to work better is enough to shift how you're going to approach the rest of the week or the next week. Moving on to question 4. This is all about progress. What progress have you made since we last spoke or since our last session? Now, this question isn't there to shame anyone. It's actually there for 2 very important reasons. First, it gives us a chance to celebrate the small steps that are so easy to overlook. High achievers are notorious for this. They finish something, move straight to the next task, and barely acknowledge what just happened. But progress matters. Psychologists call this the progress principle. The idea that recognizing small wins significantly increases motivation, engagement, and focus. And when people can see that they're moving forward, even in small ways, their energy shifts, momentum starts to build, and they're more likely to keep going. But the question also serves as a bit of a wake-up call when needed. Because if someone has a meaningful goal for the quarter or an annual target that they want to hit, progress has to be happening every week, not perfectly, not dramatically, but consistently. If weeks go by without movement, it becomes much harder to reach that goal within a 90-day cycle. So this is where a lot of small business owners fall into what I call the binge burnout cycle. They push really hard for a period of time, then they get overwhelmed or exhausted or sick. Then the important projects get pushed aside for weeks or even months while they handle the buildup of client work and daily operations. Then eventually they try to sprint again. It's exhausting and it rarely produces the results that they want. Weekly coaching conversations, they help break that pattern because every week there's a simple question: what progress was made? And even when someone feels like they didn't do much, it was crazy, I can guarantee you we always can find something. Maybe they outlined something while they were sitting eating lunch on a napkin, or built a client tracking document. Maybe they finalized a pricing structure, or created a new meeting rhythm with their team. These little steps matter. Sometimes progress is as simple as spending 15 focused minutes moving a project forward. Many business owners put off important improvements and projects for months, sometimes years, just because they never make time to start. They think they need a big chunk of time, but small steps each week can change that. And when those small steps add up over a 90-day period, the progress can be surprisingly significant. That's how momentum really builds, not through these huge bursts of effort, but through consistent, visible, weekly progress, week after week. Question 5. This is where we really land the plane of focus. In a session, I'll ask my client, by the end of this conversation, what would feel most valuable to walk away with? Now, this question changes everything because instead of wandering through ideas or brainstorming endlessly, the coaching conversation becomes outcome focused. Maybe the goal for this session is choosing the right CRM, finalizing pricing, mapping out a marketing funnel, designing a team meeting structure, role playing a sales conversation, or outlining a social media campaign to promote an upcoming event. When we define the outcome at the beginning of the session becomes much more productive. Now, if you're using these questions on your own throughout the day, you can easily adapt this one. Instead of asking what would make this coaching conversation valuable, you might ask yourself, by the end of this Pomodoro, what result would feel meaningful? If you're not familiar with Pomodoros, you can head over to my YouTube channel. I've got a whole series on this way of time blocking that works really well for my clients. Or you could ask yourself, by lunchtime, what would I like to have moved forward? Or even ask yourself, by the end of the day, what would make today feel like progress? These are just different ways of framing this fifth question that helps your brain focus on finishing something specific, an outcome, instead of just staying busy. Now, there's one more piece of this conversation that's really important, because answering these 5 questions once is helpful, but answering them regularly every week is where the real power comes from. One of the biggest mistakes I see business owners make is that they set goals, maybe at the beginning of the year or at a retreat or during a big planning session, and then they jump right back into the day-to-day activity of the business. The client work, the emails, the operations, the team questions. And before they know it, a week or two has passed without any real attention going towards the big goals that actually matter the most. And that's why weekly planning and strategy are so critical. A weekly planning rhythm creates a pause, a moment where you step out of the activity of the business and you ask, what matters most this week? What will actually move the bigger goal forward? Where should my attention go? And without that pause, the week tends to get filled by whatever's most urgent in the moment. And there's some interesting science behind this too. You see, our brains are wired to respond to urgency and novelty. So when something new pops up and you can't resist it, an email, a message, a problem needs solving, the brain releases a small hit of dopamine, which makes it feel important to respond right away. That's helpful for survival, but it's not always helpful for strategic work. Strategic work usually requires longer periods of uninterrupted focus. It's easy to be distracted when you lose focus, and suddenly the most important project of the quarter is just not getting your attention. So if focus doesn't happen automatically, what actually creates it? In my experience, focus is not about willpower. It's not about trying harder or pushing yourself to concentrate. Focus is something that gets designed. And over the years, I've noticed that there's a few key ingredients that make focus much easier. So let's walk through them together. So the first is the clarity of your goal. And it's really around the idea of needing to know what you're actually working towards. That's why your annual planning and your 90-day goal settings matters so much. Without a clearly defined goal, your brain goes into a very predictable mode. It starts chasing whatever feels urgent in the moment. The email that just landed in your inbox, or that question from the client you need to answer, a new idea that feels so exciting, a new software or tool, and the urgency starts running the day. But when the goal is clear, something shifts. Your brain has a filter. You can look at a request or an idea or a problem and quickly ask yourself, does this move my goal forward? And if the answer is no, it's much easier to set that distraction aside. Clarity of goal gives your attention somewhere to land, somewhere to focus on. The second ingredient is reduced complexity. One of the fastest ways to destroy your focus is trying to move too many projects forward at the same time. I see this all the time with small business owners because you're so creative. You're building a new offer, you're launching a course, you're fixing your marketing, you're updating systems. Oh, and you want to hire someone, you want to improve operations, and you want to do it all at once. Even though all of those ideas are good, the brain struggles when it's juggling too many priorities. Focus is going to grow when you simplify. when there's one clear project that matters most for the next 90 days, one direction, one priority that keeps showing up in your calendar, when complexity goes down, focus will naturally increase. The third ingredient is having a defined next step. Your brain relaxes when it knows exactly what the next move is. Ambiguity drains your attention. If a project feels vague, work on marketing or improve system like I talked in the last episode, it becomes surprisingly hard to start. But when the next step is clear, actions become much easier. For example, write the outline for the workshop or research 3 CRM options. Draft the first version of the new offer page. These are clear next steps and they're going to reduce friction. And when friction goes down, focus becomes much easier to maintain. The fourth ingredient is visible progress. When you can see movement, motivation increases. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as the progress principle, the idea that even small wins create positive momentum. When you can see that something moved forward this week, it energizes your brain. You're more likely to keep going. And that's why celebrating small steps, like I talked about earlier in this episode, matters so much because momentum builds through progress that you can actually see. And the final ingredient is intentional conversations. Sometimes the fastest way to regain your focus isn't sitting alone trying to figure everything out. It's asking the right questions, maybe using the 5 I shared with you today, or having a conversation that brings you back to what matters, which is exactly what the 5 questions we talked about today are designed to do. They reconnect you to your goal. They help you notice what's getting in the way. They highlight the progress that you've made, and they clarify the next step. When those ingredients are in place, clear goals, simplified priorities, defined next steps, visible progress, and intentional questions, your focus becomes much easier. And that's when momentum really begins to build. Let me ask you something. Right now, as you're listening, do you know what your 90-day goal is? The reality for most small business owners is that they're straddling 2 roles at the same time. They're still doing client work, but they're also responsible for leading the business as the CEO. And they're usually not large enough to have full-time people in roles like marketing, sales, human resources, customer services, finances, or operations. So the owner, the CEO, ends up carrying all of those responsibilities themselves. So they're serving clients during the day, then trying to figure out marketing when they can squeeze it in, then handling team issues, then thinking about pricing or systems or hiring. And it's a lot, not because they're incapable, but because they're trying to wear every single hat at the same time, and they have to at the beginning. And when you're in that position, no wonder that you lose the plot. Checking in weekly and using a 90-day cycle and plan allows you to gradually turn chaos into systems, to create automations, to upgrade tools, to document processes, to clarify offers, to organize your information so it's easier to access. And as that structure builds, your business becomes easier to run, which means that you can focus on the things that matter most. Because when systems are doing their job, your brain doesn't have to hold everything together anymore. And that's when momentum really begins to build. Research from Harvard Business School has shown that leaders who build regular reflection and planning time into their schedules make significantly better strategic decisions than those who stay in constant reaction mode. So, in other words, stepping back regularly it's not a luxury. A weekly momentum habit is part of how effective leaders operate. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you already know that I teach something called the weekly momentum process. In fact, you can use the link below to go to the free training, Weekly Planning for Busy Professionals, because I really believe that focus has to be reestablished every single week. And that's why weekly momentum follows a simple rhythm. First, I want you to rewind the previous week, look at what worked, what didn't, where did things take longer than expected. This rewind helps you see clearly what's actually happening instead of just feeling like the week just disappeared. And then we realign with the bigger goal. That's a lot of what we're talking about today. And this is where the focus formula questions come into play. You reconnect with the goal that matters for this 90 days. You identify what's getting in the way, you acknowledge the progress you've made, and you decide what result would make the next work session or the next week feel like it was successful. And that's how the week starts to become more intentional instead of reactive. After you've used the focusing questions that we've gone over in this episode, then you plan the week strategically. You protect the time for those projects so that you move the bigger goals forward, and you plug it into your calendar so that you're executing these priorities during your prime working time. The 5 questions we talked about today aren't just useful in coaching sessions. They're also incredibly powerful as part of this weekly planning ritual, because when you reconnect to the goal and identify your obstacles and define the next step, something important happens. Your week stops running you, and you step into it running your week in the driver's seat. Now, it's great to do these questions on your own, but when that weekly reflection happens in a conversation with someone else, someone who understands business strategy, something interesting happens. The clarity deepens even more. Blind spots become even more visible, and decisions can be made faster, which is exactly why most of my clients work with me on a weekly coaching rhythm. The 5 questions I shared with you are not just useful for journaling or planning, although you can use them as a powerful tool to get unstuck and to focus, but they're powerful inside a consistent coaching rhythm. There's actually a lot of research that explains why coaching accelerates progress. One concept psychologists talk about is called external accountability. When people know that they're going to check in with something about a goal, their likelihood of following through increases dramatically. There was a famous study from the American Society of Training and Development, and it found that when people simply commit to a goal, they have about a 10% chance of completing it. When they make a plan, that number goes up, but when they commit to regular accountability, their follow-through rate jumps to around 65%. And when they commit to regular accountability with someone like a coach that they respect, it can reach 95%. That's a huge difference. I mean, if you could increase your odds of hitting your goal by 95% by working with a coach, would it be worth the investment? But coaching is not just about accountability. It's also about clarity and focus. I mean, when you know you're going to sit down once a week and talk through what matters, your goals, your brain, it starts organizing information differently. You begin noticing, even before and after sessions, what actually is important, what's slowing you down, what's working, and what needs attention. And that's why most of my clients work with me on a weekly rhythm, typically 3 weeks out of the month. Every single time we meet, we start with those same 5 questions that I shared with you today. What's the main goal? What's getting in the way? What needs to work better? What progress has been made? And what would you like to focus on for this session? It may sound simple, but the repetition is incredibly powerful. Because focus isn't something you just decide once or you're born with. It's something that needs to be reestablished again and again. And without that reset, your week is going to fill up with client needs, operational issues, ideas, and small fires that appear in every business. And that's exactly why the 5 questions we talked about today matter so much. They bring you back to the goal. They help you when you've lost the plot. They help you identify what's slowing things down and clarify your next step to move things forward, day by day, week by week, to create momentum. If you're feeling pulled in 10 different directions right now, try this exercise. As you start the week, write down these 5 questions and then answer them honestly. What is the main goal you want to move forward right now? What challenges are getting in the way of that goal? Not what challenges do you have on everything in the way of that goal. What would you most like to be working better? What progress have you made towards your goal in the last week? What outcome would make your next week feel successful? Clarity creates focus, and focus eliminates distractions. The difference between feeling busy and actually moving forward usually comes down to one thing: focus. And sometimes all it takes to eliminate distractions is to invest a few minutes to ask the right questions. Now, if this episode resonated with you and you're realizing that you've been pulled in a lot of different directions lately, there are a few different ways that we can work together. Some people join me for coaching, where we meet regularly and use these kinds of coaching conversations to keep moving your business forward week by week. Other clients like to come to Get It Done weekends, where we carve out focused time together as a group to finally finish projects that have been sitting on your list for months, sometimes years. Whether that's building a new system, clarifying an offer, organizing operations, or mapping out your 90-day plan. And occasionally clients come in for VIP strategy days, where we roll up our sleeves and we work side by side to design systems, refine your messaging, build structure, and create the kind of clarity that makes your next 90 days much easier to execute. If any of that sounds like fun or what you need and you're curious about the options, you can find the link in the description below to explore the different ways that we can work together. And whether we ever work together or not, my hope is that today's episode gives you a simple tool you can use right now, so that the next time you feel distracted, overwhelmed, or pulled in 10 different directions, pause for a moment and ask yourself those 5 questions. Because clarity has a powerful way of restoring your focus. And when focus improves, something interesting happens. The right work starts moving forward again. Momentum builds, and your business becomes a lot more enjoyable to run. If you found this episode helpful, make sure you subscribe and leave a review or a comment. It helps more business owners discover the Weekly Momentum podcast. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, a business owner who's overwhelmed or distracted, send them the link to this episode. Thanks for spending the time with me today. Make me a regular Sunday or Monday weekly habit. Put me in your calendar. And until next time, remember, greatness is a habit, not a hustle. Distractions are never going to disappear, not even when you become successful. But your focus can get stronger when your priorities become clear. I'll see you in Momentum.